For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nia. So thank you very much for having me here today. I'm quite excited to discuss Rahab. Through my own study of this, I have been finding a lot more out than maybe what I knew before, and it's really been a blessing to me. So I'm really grateful just for that opportunity. So I'm going to do a bit of this. There we go. So this is what we're going to look at. We're going to have introduction and context. We'll look at Rahab's legacy, and also then we'll consider application. So here comes a good habit theory of learning. Shows that everybody likes to know what is expected of them through a session. So consider, if attention is paid, by the end of this you will be able to explain who Rahab was and who she became, and describe her role in Joshua 2 and her legacy, and also compare your own journey of faith with Rahab's. So I'm going to read. That's really small, and I don't expect you to be able to see it. I just filled in PowerPoint slides. Okay. But I'll read it to you anyway, and if you want to follow in your Bibles, it is Joshua 2. I'm reading from the English Standard Version. So, and Joshua the son of Nun sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, "Go, view the land, especially Jericho." And they went and came into the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and lodged there. And it was told to the king of Jericho, "Behold, men of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land." Then the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, "Bring out the men who have come to you, who entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land." But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. And she said, "True, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. And when the gate was about to be closed at dark, the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them." But she had brought them up to the roof and hid them with the stalks of flax that she had laid in order on the roof. So the men pursued after them on the way to the Jordan as far as the fords. And the gate was shut as soon as the pursuers had gone out. Before the men lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, "I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that as I have dealt kindly with you, you also will deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a sure sign that you will save alive my father and my mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death." And the men said to her, "Our life for yours, even to death. If you do not tell this business of ours, then when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you." Then she let them down by rope through the window, for her house was built into the city wall, so that she lived in the wall. And she said to them, "Go into the hills, or the pursuers will encounter you, and hide there 3 days until the pursuers have returned. Then afterward you may go your way." And the men said to her, "We will be guiltless with respect to this oath of yours that you have made us swear. Behold, when we come into the land, you shall tie the scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and you shall gather into your house your father and mother, your brothers, and all your father's household. Then if anyone goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we shall be guiltless. But if a hand is laid on anyone who is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head. But if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be guiltless with respect to your oath that you have made us swear." And she said, "According to your words, so be it." And she sent them away, and they departed. And she tied the scarlet cord in the window. I'll read on. I was going to stop there, but I will read on. They departed and went into the hills, and remained there 3 days, until the pursuers returned, and the pursuers searched all along the way, and found nothing. Then the 2 men returned. They came down from the hills, and passed over, and came to Joshua the son of Nun, and they told him all that had happened to them. And they said to Joshua, Truly the Lord has given all the land into our hands, and also all the inhabitants of the land melt away because of us. So some brief background information to where we find ourselves in Joshua 2. After the Exodus, when Moses was leader, he sent spies to see what the land of Canaan was like, and God had promised them the land. And although the land was bountiful and fruitful, the Canaanites were described as terrifying. They saw giants and Nephilim, if you look in Numbers 13 and also in Deuteronomy 1, the recap. And the Israelites were afraid and refused to invade the promised land. And because of their doubt and unbelief, that generation were denied entry to the promised land and were in the wilderness for 40 years. Moses passed away, and then Joshua became the leader of the people. So God told Joshua that the Israelites were to be given the promised land. So in chapter 2, as we just read, Joshua sends 2 spies to go and find out more about the land, especially Jericho, in verse 1. So straight away in verse 1 we meet Rahab. She's the first person who is introduced to us in the promised land. So who was Rahab? We can see from this chapter that she was a Canaanite prostitute who had a house in the city walls. So this would have been prime location for watching the comings and goings in and out of Jericho. And due to her profession, it is likely that this would have been a stop-off location for some of the tradesmen and soldiers who passed through Jericho. Rahab would likely be privy to a lot of information from the mouths of the men that passed through her home. And Rahab would likely have the ability to be discreet. So knowledge and discretion were what the spies needed at that time. So there isn't much information about how she became a prostitute. However, this was a culture of very low moral standards. And in that context and environment, it would likely have been viewed as a career which wasn't as controversial as what we may consider from the perspective of our culture. So the Canaanites were known to worship many false gods. So according to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, there were more than 234 Canaanite gods. And some religious practices of the Canaanites included child sacrifices and ritual or pagan prostitution. There was mention of bestiality, incest, idolatry. If you look at Leviticus 18 and 19, there's more detail there about what God suggests or God insists that his people don't do. So if you look at that and think that is what the Canaanites did, and that gives you context then as to what kind of a life they were living. So the Canaanites, they attributed the fertility of their lands to the gods such as Baal or Baal. There was a debate about that in Kids Club on Friday. I will say Baal. The people offered animal sacrifices to the gods, but they would also sacrifice children, specifically the firstborn. I've put some information here about some of the things that I've read, about some of the practices, and I did give a bit of a warning, disturbing content that's in red, because I didn't know if I was going to delve deeper into it. But just some kind of ideas of the sacrifices. Women were expected to sacrifice, or some of them willingly sacrificed their children, and the idea was that if they were demonstrating any upset by the sacrifices that they had made of their firstborns, then that sacrifice didn't count. And there was also something I read about expected to be dancing about and showing kind of celebration. There was also other things I read about the sexual union, the rituals, the ritual sex. There is some context on that. Is basically that people believe that the gods controlled the fertility of the land, and in order to encourage the gods to be fertile and to make their lands fertile, they would choose a high priest from one of their Canaan priests, and there would be a woman from the community, and they would have public union together in order to try and encourage the gods to be fertile. So that's just a little bit of context really as to what it was like there. I did have a little slide there. So there's some of the gods there. That's Moloch, who is referred to in the Bible, and where that's who they would sacrifice their children to. There's Baal, El, there's a picture up there. So some of the acts that they would do. So this is the context and culture that where Rahab had known throughout her life. So looking at her legacy. So Rahab was aware that the men were Israelite spies. So going back to Joshua 2 now, after that little sideline there. So Rahab was aware that the men were Israelite spies. She had taken them to the roof and hidden them under stalks of flax, which would have been harvested at that time of year and put on the roof to dry out. The king was aware that the Israelite spies had gone to Rahab's house, and he sent messengers to get the men from her home. In verse 4, Rahab said that the men had been to her house, but that they were no longer there, and she encouraged the messengers to go after the men as they would overtake them. So many people who have written or have spoken about Rahab's story focus on this part of the chapter, the lie. And there's been a lot of debate about whether she was justified in lying here. She told them a bold-faced lie. She said, they've gone, they're not here anymore, but actually they were hiding on the roof. So there are a few different thoughts on this. So one is the moral weight put on the lie. There's a suggestion that some lies are morally better than others if the person who has asked the question has lost the moral right to know the truth. For example, as you heard about earlier, in Exodus 1 verse 19, the Egyptian midwives feared God and said that the Hebrew women were strong and gave birth before they got there to avoid killing the firstborn sons. So God dealt kindly with them. And if you think about kind of maybe more recent, if you think about sort of the Second World War, where Jews were hidden, their location were not disclosed. So that's the sort of idea around that, the morality weight that's put to the lie. But others suggest that God cannot in any circumstances accept a lie. This is against his commandments, and in this situation it was Rahab's faith that was honoured, not that the lie was justified. So she was honoured because she had that faith. So considering her background and the context that we've just looked at, it's very likely that Rahab had low moral and ethical understanding. She was at the early stages of her faith, and therefore she may not have necessarily known the implication of lying or God's view of it. She didn't know that what she was doing was wrong in that situation. That's another argument. So why did Rahab hide the spies and lie about it? Why didn't she just tell the messengers where the men were? This would have been considered a treasonous act if she was caught, and she, most definitely, and possibly her family, would have been killed if they were found out. So the answer is made clear in verses 9 to 11, which I'm not going to reread, but you're welcome to look at them. This is effectively her testimony. God had planted the seed of faith. She was being transformed. Rahab said that she knew that the Lord had given them the land. She openly acknowledges that God is the God of heaven above and the earth below. She explained that the people in Jericho were fearful of the Israelites and their God, but she professes her own faith in this God, and she saw that this was the one true God. And when it mentions in the chapter about the people of Jericho, they were fearful, that's fear of fighting against it because they've heard all the things that has happened to the Israelites. So they were scared, but that didn't awaken their faith in the God. They were just scared of the impact of this God that they had heard about. But Rahab knew that the destruction of her city and everything she had known was imminent. She had desperate and urgent faith. She asked to be spared by the Israelites when God gave them the land, and also asked for her family to be saved. The spies gave her 3 conditions or actions that she had to do. So she had to tie a scarlet cord to the window where she let the spies out of the house. She was to gather all of her family into the house, and if anyone was outside of the house, then they would not be spared. And she was not to tell anyone about their business, otherwise the spies would be guiltless of any of their bloodshed. So Rahab had also advised them to hide for 3 days in the hills. After they left, she tied the scarlet cord to her window, and if you can read, it's straight away. She tied the scarlet cord to her window straight away. So the scarlet cord could be seen as a symbol or echo of the blood on the doorpost of the Passover. The Israelites were spared if they had the blood of the lamb on their door, and Rahab would be spared if she put the scarlet cord on the window. Rahab knew that this was a matter of life and death. She knew that the only way to be saved was to act on the faith that she had in the God of the Israelites. To Rahab, God was bigger than her culture, customs, and the people around whom she lived. She didn't succumb to the fear of man when the king's messengers questioned her about the whereabouts of the spies. She obeyed the conditions of the spies and displayed her faith through her actions. We can see in James 2:14 that it says, "What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but doesn't have works? Can that faith save him?" And more specifically in James 2:25, it says, "And in the same way, wasn't also Rahab the prostitute justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way?" So she demonstrated her faith through her actions. When the Israelites invaded and destroyed Jericho, Rahab and her family were spared. So you can see in verse 23, so the young men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab, and her father and mother and brothers, and all who belonged to her. And they brought all her relatives and put them outside the camp of Israel. However, Rahab and her family were considered unclean and were put outside the camp. So she isn't just immediately accepted into the camp of the Israelites. She and her family are considered unclean at this point because of the practices and where they lived. So only when they had been made clean, as was the custom according to the Israelite law, which is another act of faith, we can see that in Joshua 6 verse 25, 2 verses later, but actually a lot of time probably later, it says, but Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute, with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. She had demonstrated her faith through actions, and she continued to demonstrate her faith by taking aboard the customs of the Israelites and becoming clean and living among the Israelites. We don't know about her family. We don't know if they went through all the rituals. The men would have had to be circumcised. They would have had to completely change their way of living. So we're not sure whether her family lived within the Israelites, with the Israelites. It just makes reference to Rahab there. So Rahab had faith. She acted on it and was spared. She's mentioned in Hebrews 11 verse 31. And by faith the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And more incredibly, in Matthew 1 verse 5 we see Rahab. And Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and down to Christ. She was redeemed. She was a Canaanite who had faith in the one and only God, and demonstrated her faith through action and was spared. So not only was she spared, she lived among the Israelites and was brought into the lineage of Christ. She's a Gentile woman who lived in a culture of extreme practices, as we've discussed earlier, but she is mentioned in the genealogy of Christ, demonstrating that the gospel is for everyone, is for all. So a woman who was from low moral standards, ethically compromised, was plucked out of the depths of the pagan culture because she had responded to the God who showed himself to her by the stories that she had heard. So if we're looking at application, how can this apply to us? So Rahab knew that the city and culture in which she lived was going to be destroyed. She knew that God was bigger than anything and anyone in that moment. She didn't succumb to the peer pressure or cultural demands. She stood firm in her beliefs in God. And I think from what we've heard so far, this is a theme that is running through, and is something that's actually stood out to me so far, even though we're only on number 3. And I'm confident that this will be something that we hear throughout the rest of the talks. So that is a challenge for us in today's society. In a society that is increasingly diluting the word of God to fit in with cultural expectations, a question for me and for us is, are we strong enough to see the one and only holy God is bigger than people and bigger than our culture? So how do we view God? Are we courageous enough in our faith to stand up and proclaim the God of heaven and earth below in sheer desperation like Rahab? And are we sharing the good news with our family and friends, and are asking for their salvation like Rahab did with her family before the destruction of Jericho? Or we may otherwise think that the story of Rahab doesn't really apply to us. We've never been in a situation like hers. We've never been involved in immoral sex or a culture like that, or as sinful in our actions. But we need to be careful not to set our own moral standards and comparing ourselves to others. So a final note for consideration. When looking at Joshua 6, Hebrews 11 or James 2, why is she still referred to as Rahab the prostitute? So I read out of 8 times that she's mentioned in the Bible, she is referred to Rahab the prostitute 6 out of those 8 times. And as I think, surely she's earned the right to move beyond this now. But apart from enabling us to be able to talk about her in context to this day, Rahab's past was part of her message. It is a means of reaching others. Rahab likely never forgot where God found her and where God redeemed her. She knew where she had been and how far God had brought her. So we can often hide our past and our sins for fear of judgment from others, again, fearing man over God. But we may just find that revisiting where we have been kindles a fire in our hearts and renews a desperate appreciation for the God who saved us and brought us to where we are. God didn't reveal himself to Rahab after she had gotten her life together. If you think of it in verse 23, it wasn't after she had gone through all those practices. He called her from the depths of the mess, and she was used for a purpose that would impact on generations forever. So God finds us where we are. We, like Rahab, need to respond and continue responding to him.
Amen.